mom used to play the radio while I fell asleep. Usually she'd turn it off once I conked out, but sometimes she'd forget. And there you were. You know, whenever I heard your voice, I knew it was so far past my bedtime. Just felt like I was getting away with something.
I am the one who convinced Bob to give you one last show.
You got bit by a wild animal tonight. Who knows what kind of diseases those things are carrying?
You sure you're not seeing anything, Amy? Anything that's not really there? Oh! There's Amy!
You want to bite me again, Amy Marlowe?
Look at me! Hey! It's just one of those nights.
There's never been a night like this one.
You're losing it, Amy. Everyone is saying so.
It's all you, Amy, I promise.
Strange thing, your last day. And anything, really. Everything's the same. Till it's not.
I love this film so much. Unexpected, because when I saw the trailer, I was like, is this going to be like that retro theme, a lot of fun, a lot of vampire? And I did not expect to come away from this film being absolutely sucker punched by some of its themes. So big applause to Erik, definitely. I know this was your baby, your writing, your directing, but a brilliant cast as well. And Caroline came on and I just fangirled completely. So let's start there, shall we, with let's just say the clickbait questions that everyone's going to be asking. I mean, certainly, Caroline, this seemed to be a role that was written for you, particularly given we all grew up Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I know, obviously, that wasn't your first film, but to almost see that almost a nod to the reprisal of the role of Stretch in the radio, etc., and of course the contrast between you as an actress in your 20s then, I'm assuming, or 20s, 30s then.
29.
And as an older woman now, it just seemed perfect for you. But as a casting, was this a role that was created around you? Because there's lots of nods, and Erik, you can answer this, or is this something that, well, obviously you've made it yourself, but something that you've come into through the normal audition process?
I think honest to God fate, like I think it was written for her before I knew it was for her. It just ended up that way because I was sucker punched when Caroline came into our orbit with this movie, because when it lined up through a very generous referral, I was just gobsmacked by the way the themes of the script mirrored her life as a woman, her life in horror, the fact that where she began with Texas Chainsaw, the idea of a career that began in radio, in a kind of meta sense, and returning to that for 34 years later is just so crazy for me. And what Caroline was able to do with that material was just so exciting to me, and just the meta poeticism of it just really, really hit me. And so it was just a gift that it lined up. I mean, Caroline, I think once we connected, like, I was just trying to gauge interest. And the second we got on the phone, you were like, I'm doing it. And I was like, oh, she's like, let's close today. Let's close the deal today. And okay, I'll get it over.
I do have to say, though, and I want to throw this in, this came about for me through the generosity of Barbara Crampton, my peer in horror. She was the initial offer, but she was going to be shooting Castle Freak, the remake of Castle Freak, in Albania. And she and I and a group of women in horror, because we're sort of a band of sisters, I suppose, And we had all met for drinks one night, and she said, I've got a script that is so you. It's perfect for you. It's perfect for where your life has been, where your life is going. You got to read this thing. And I read it, and it absolutely, I mean, there wasn't an angle that I felt like I couldn't address authentically. And especially with the musical aspects. You know, I started my life over a little bit 4 years ago. My children are grown, and I was married a very long time. But I wanted all this back, and I knew to have it, I had to launch a little bit, and that was very dodgy. I had a movie to go to at the time, Green Light, directed by Graham Denman, huge talent. But I didn't know where I was going after that. And Barbara showed up, and, you know.
I love stories of fate, because watching the film, me, and I imagine a lot of the audience, and actually what's been said in reviews so far, I don't think it could have been anyone else. So definitely the stars have aligned here. Adam, do you want to add anything to that? I mean, I know this was mainly around Caroline, but in your experience in working on with this incredible cast.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Eric and I were taking a movie last year, or I guess almost 2 years ago now, around festivals, and a movie called Long Lost. And we had been kind of coming up with this idea for 10 minutes. And it was, you know, kind of up in the air, floating. Some of the details were coming around. And then as soon as Caroline came into the picture, it really solidified what the movie was going to be.
Absolutely.
It was really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's especially as there's some beautiful nods to, or at least to the audience and the audience that's seen it so far. There seems to be some beautiful nods towards certain influences from that era that we will have grown up with, or all of us grown up with. So, you know, I particularly noticed, well, you know, that the radio, the way it's set up, there's definitely a nod towards, well, it seemed to be towards Texas Chainsaw, and the exit sign as well. But for me, very Jacob's Ladder-like in certain ways, and there was some other nods there. But Erik, as the writer and director, what were your horror influences there? I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of Easter eggs, but some of us will be reading into it too much.
Began with the feeling that I had growing up watching late night horror anthology shows, some of which were more like Twilight Zone stuff, but some stuff that was more off the beaten path, and the kind of idea which is now one of our taglines of an extraordinary night. There's never been a night like this one, right? So there's something is askew tonight, and what's happening. And so the idea of making a movie that for us felt like an extended episode from a horror anthology show, and being, you know, maybe a little too young to watch, or being up a little too late and trying to encapsulate what that feeling was of, you know, being in the dark and watching a show on some channel you didn't realize existed at 11:30 at night or whatever. That's where it started. And then just figuring out how to do that in our own way, not trying to reinvent the wheel, embrace tropes, but infuse them with specificity that they might not have been infused with before. And to tell a story about women over a certain age who I feel can sometimes get left out of the diversity conversation. And that was a very interesting thing for us. And then vampirism just seemed like a natural metaphor for that going forward.
Absolutely. And certainly, you know, a big part of what I wanted to talk to you about, and all of you, is those themes of womanhood there. But let's start from the writer's perspective. Effectively, why choose a leading, well, you've got your, I love the dynamic between sort of the older woman being retired, etc., and all of that, with your lead antagonist of the younger version. And I have a lot to say about that character as well. I really enjoyed that dynamic. But from you as a writer, Erik, why choose a woman, to focus around womanhood, as opposed to, I mean, this dynamic would have also worked with men, but I love the fact that you chose your leading ladies, and you hit it right on the head as well. But from your perspective, you know, tell us about the journey of that character and writing that character.
I think no matter what, when you get over a certain age, there's a possibility of some kind of ageism or being past your prime or being pushed out. But there are definitely certain intricacies that, from what I've seen, what I've heard, my mom was in corporate for a long time, and just living a life and being friends with women, that there are intricacies of that are specific to being a woman. And the interesting thing was just to see what that is and to create a character who fights back against that in her own way was a really interesting thing. And Caroline, we've spoken about this before too, the idea of like what it is for her. We don't know if she's a mom. We don't know if she's been married. We don't know anything. We know this is her family at the radio station, to tell a story.
Right.
This is a choice that she made to maybe forego another kind of life and stay here and be part of this was really interesting to me. For a woman to have made that choice and deal with the benefits and now I don't know if consequences is the right word, but the fallout of that. I don't know, Caroline, what do you think about that?
I think Amy's dynamic is pretty evident from the very beginning. You know, she's into the music. I sort of felt the dynamic between Sienna and Amy was based less on being female and more on culture, education, class, status. Nicole is the new model. Nicole, Sienna went to Berkeley. Sienna is acculturated today in a contemporary way that Amy cannot be, in a way. You know, she's playing a style of music for a lot of people, unless you are a horror fan, for a lot of people, it's not considered very current, you know? It's and as the story unfolds and as the competition between the two women sharpens, because Sienna's character doesn't have to try, she's hired. It's done. Fait accompli. You know, you can almost, Amy feels less than. Amy does not feel competitive. Amy knows that she's over. And it's less about being female, I felt, from Amy's point of view, than it was that Amy grew up in a trailer park and Sienna grew up in a high-rise in San Francisco. And in a way, that's kind of the way it reflected on me. I think men's and women's competitions frequently are reflected in the very same pursuits: buying things, having cars, making money. I think the genders have moved together more and more as time goes on. I don't know. It was
something so offensive to feel that conflict between the idea that Amy has devoted her life to this place and she's using it as a stepping stone. But it was
entirely. They don't even dress alike. Amy's wearing logo t-shirt.
Yeah, exactly.
Sienna is very upscale. You know, she could walk down the runway.
And Adam, we talked about this. Adam's the producer on the movie too, and in like early creative conversations, it was just important. We were talking about making sure that while there was strong antagonism between them, that it was never one-sided. You agreed with some that one was saying, you didn't with other, and that early scene when right before Amy goes on the air for the first time.
The last time.
Yeah.
And it becomes very that we earned that, and that it didn't start there. I think we talked about that early on, Adam, right? That it wasn't just, we weren't villainizing anybody necessarily.
Absolutely. Yeah, we wanted, I mean, even though there is a certain amount of betrayal from every character throughout the movie, you know, one of the things you want to go for is that this is her family and that the dynamic is shifting because of this other way. You know, you have this really congruent group at the beginning, like this kind of, you know, rock, kind of a, you know, grungier group. And then when Sienna comes in, she really does threaten the whole dynamic. She wants to push out Amy, and it changes Bill's attitude, Bob's attitude, sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, but you definitely don't want it to feel like all of a sudden everyone's so happy to turn on Amy, because that's not the reality of any of these situations. I think that you see people that are looking for safety. I think that when you see the very real threat that this could be the end for Amy, who knows what her future holds, but it's not, in this station, that you'd expect your family to team up and defend you. You'd say, no, we're not the same family without Amy. And I think that they're all kind of having to accept that they're valuing their own position. They're being, they have to compromise and sacrifice her almost.
I'm seeing it right there, because it's like there aren't tons of moments where anybody's like, no one's like, you're out of here, Amy, bye. I mean, I think the horror is the apathy of it all, is you can invest 30 years of your life doing something, building a career, building a brand, and then it's over. And that happened. I was touring a different radio station where we didn't shoot, and I was talking to the jocks, and they had found out that their station was going to be closing, but they had a few more months, and they were telling me how atypical it was. Normally they said you walk in on your last day, you do your show, and then they hand you a box, and then you're never on the air again. And that was it. I knew that was the key thing for the beginning of the movie, is the sort of inconsequentialness of it all. And the existential crisis that comes with that. And that's where that line, they literally said to me, in radio, you're hired to get fired. It's amazing to have a career more than 5 or 10 years somewhere. And I was like, oh, that's what the movie's about.
Yeah.
We come and we go, and how, and ultimately nobody cares or remembers you, or you're just a footnote. I mean, and then compound that with being a woman in the industry. I mean, that is something that I just felt was really worth exploring, and then wrapping it in fun genre wrapping paper.
Well, certainly.
The weird juxtaposition about that whole thing is, at the very time that we were exploring that dynamic was coming alive within the horror genre, with the return of Jamie Lee to the Halloween franchise, with Barbara Crampton's career growing. She's now producing. The fact that in Amy's world, there was no longer a marketplace for her, and yet in mine, there still is. It was very, very ironic to me.
But for a movie, it's like, Amy, no spoilers, but like, it's about, do you accept that, or and then if you accept it, do you just die, or do you let yourself become reborn? And how do you do that?
Well, let's move on to sort of the grief cycle. I'll come back to various themes that have come on, including Aaron's approach to Amy leaving as well, Adam. But certainly the grief cycle is mentioned specifically, and this is where it got to me, because I've gone through huge changes. So I've hit my 40th, but on my 40th, I was told I had cancer. I'm in remission. So the living,
thank God.
Yeah, exactly. But it was very much, I remember coming to that point of, and I'm open about it on social media, but a case of, okay, this is going to be the most traumatic point in my life. Every single one of us have gone through some form of trauma, especially in the middle of COVID. We are really examining what's important to me, to everyone. But for me, it was like, okay, this was like, being faced with your mortality, or what's next, giving 30 years of your life, whatever it is. It made you have that choice of, do I give up or do I grow? And I was like, I'm going to grow, and I'm going to make my films, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to try. And of course, in all of that, I've gone through that grief cycle, which is why I ended up laughing, crying, and everything, and through the film. Now, obviously we see Amy go through that very literal stage, and I could literally plot every single point where you went through, where she went through that. But again, drawing on the inspiration, all of the characters around her as well, and outside of life, have gone through that. So on drawing on your own experiences, as much as you feel comfortable, tell us about those personal grief cycles that fed into this movie, and all the inspiration, and Erik, you've just mentioned about that being faced with, do you embrace change or do you rail against it? So open floor, tell, let's hear your stories.
I just want to say that I think it's really awesome that you picked up on that, because there were lots of things happening like under the surface thematically in this movie. And I know Adam and Nicole have that little thing in the kitchen about stages of grief, but it does loosely follow that. And it's really awesome that you picked up on that, because that was, you know, that's there, but a lot of people haven't verbalized that. So it's really awesome that you have. I mean, mine, the origins of this movie are that we thought a bigger one was going to go, and then it didn't, and it got very close. And so, I mean, the birth of this movie, I think, came out of the stages of grief. You know, we got upset. I tried to figure out a way to make it happen. It wasn't working, and that puts you in a really bad headspace. And then ultimately, you're like, when people in the inner circle are like, "Got to keep pushing," you go, "Okay, what can I do with what I have?" And can we make something, not just, you know, can we make anything out of that? And okay, we can. Can we try to make something extraordinary out of that? Yeah, we can try. And then you get awesome collaborators like these guys. And so, yeah, I mean, this movie was born out of grief.
It's really interesting, but also interesting that how when you decide to go down that path, how that path opens for you, as it has for me. And it's a story I'm hearing as I'm meeting all the you know, the various filmmakers. They're like, oh, it seemed to stay a while, and then all this good fortune happened, which is incredible. Adam, yourself, I mean, obviously you've had a lot of input on this. You know, talk to us about that. I said that inspiration, those stories, your own stories behind what you brought to this.
Yeah, I think that you know, one of the things we touched briefly on earlier is that there isn't really a good guy or a bad guy. That a lot of the characters, or all of the characters, they're all in different stages of grief somewhere. That when something traumatic happens, it doesn't just affect the person that it happens to, not to, you know, take that away from someone, but your community also grieves, and they grieve in different ways, and they react in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, you know, trying to see from each character's point of view how they're dealing with this, where they are in actually accepting what's going on, that you really get to see, you know, you get these kind of tense dynamics, but you can really kind of understand everyone as human. Mm-hmm. You know, so I think that that's one of the big challenges, especially when you look at something that aesthetically is a little more punk, and aesthetically is kind of set up in like this lady's being forced out, good guy, bad guy dynamic. That's something that we really wanted to challenge of, you know, yes, Amy's being pushed out, but, you know, Sienna's being given an opportunity. Aaron is maybe not siding with Amy vocally, but he's also playing some card of self-preservation. So, yeah, I think that just going through, you know, especially for acting, I think that more life experience and the more, the closer that you can get with people, the more you can connect with people, the more it's going to inform your empathy bone, how, you know, how much you can, you know, how subtle the shades of gray are that you can see, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Aaron's character as well. I think you're right in that all of the characters, there wasn't that, you know, that there was that real depth, and you could see with Aaron, he obviously adored Amy. He's grown up with her, you know, there's that beautiful story about him ringing into the show when he was young. And you can see that there's a real, albeit professional, but that there's a real sort of love between them. You know, and we grow with our work family, you know, we spend all hours, but he has that loyalty as well to Sienna, who, you know, he's been to school with. And you know, there's that, without the spoilers, but when Amy asks about, why didn't you tell me? And it was like, because it was almost like there wasn't that acceptance of what was going on. He was hoping everything to be normal, which I thought played out beautifully. really, really beautifully. I really liked the dynamic between Amy and Aaron, actually. It seemed that there seemed to be a very natural, I know the natural chemistry between actually all the cast. I think everyone was blessed there in how you all got along. But yeah, no, brilliant, because you really understood all of the characters, even creepy, even the creepy security guard, who I think really came into his own in the final scenes,
Yeah.
which I thought was brilliant. But no, those dynamics, and even with Sienna as the antagonist, she fangirled immediately, didn't she? But had that cutthroat ruthlessness that we're Gen Z are having to embrace, because everyone goes to uni, everyone has first classes, everyone's at that now. So is that I loved seeing that different dynamic play out. So Caroline, I've asked about those grief cycles. You mentioned going through changes yourself this year. So I'm assuming you drew on that, but please do add in your own words, sort of your embracing of all those changes in Amy's character.
I found the dynamic to be entirely personal, because the only difference was Amy has devoted herself to the radio station and the music and that environment. WLST, that's her radio station, that is her world, that's her universe. When a woman marries and has children, it is very different for women being married and having children. No matter how much their husband participates and fathers and does all the things, it's a natural inclination, I think, for women to be self-sacrificing. Mm-hmm. It's just natural. You give yourself over to your family. And I did do that for 22 years. Mm-hmm. And I knew in order to be where I am in this moment right now with all of you, I would have to leave that. I waited until my older son is autistic. So that element of my life was all encompassing and completely absorbing. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't much of me there, but to leave that and let people's lives recalibrate. My second son, my younger son is doing college. He's actually going to Berkeley online. That's devastating because it is a death. And I had to execute that.
You okay? No, don't apologize.
And there's a lot of guilt that goes with that, but I so wanted to achieve again. And I didn't get a lot of support from my female friends. There was one female friend who said, do it. Everybody else said, no, you're too old. That's the word that I got, is you're too old. And I'm still hearing that, by the way. You're posing nude again? You're too old. But I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this. And it was very difficult, but it was also exhilarating. It was like jumping out of an airplane, which I have done before. But it was exhilarating. And I knew I was making the right move. I knew I was doing the right thing. This is the only life you have. This is all you have. This is it. Yeah. You don't get more. So.
Yeah, you've got to embrace it. Absolutely.
Do you? I think Caroline just really exemplified like the rebellious spirit of this movie and why she, why she is Amy Marlowe.
Aries girl, absolutely, like me.
Yes!
Like we just pick up chairs and throw them at life. Literally, I believe in one of your auditions. What? Yeah.
And even more importantly, when I let go of my children to let them grow and change, they grew and they changed. And I have wonderful relationships with them now. My older son lives in a group home. He has a job. He's got friends. He's conversational. He's my biggest fan. And my younger son is Berkeley Online. So, and I'm here now, and I got to do this, and it's so extraordinary. And I get to date and take my clothes off and pose nude, and it's an amazing life.
I mean, what Caroline's describing and what Adam, Caroline, it all made sense. Parallels, like, I mean, Amy is Amy and Caroline is Caroline, but the thematic resonance of like this thing that they share, this sort of irreducible journey of being part of a community and losing community and trying to find yourself and identity outside of community is just so palpable.
Exactly.
And certainly from I said, a female perspective, you know, I mean, it really resonated with me for similar reasons. You know, I was married 15 years. I've gone through a load of changes over the last few years. I've told you about some of my story, which is why when I saw and I identified very, very strongly with Amy, albeit, you know, the character is older, but there's themes that, yeah, absolutely women go through at various stages of the life, whether it's when family move home, it's divorce. I'm not saying that men don't go, because there is that similar, but I think I was so surprised at how many parallels I could draw on. And certainly, yep, horror is boundary breaking in that we are seeing older or actresses over 40 nude.
Yes.
We are seeing them in leading characters. We're listening to those voices they are producing. You know, it's fantastic. But Hollywood, you know, the broader have yet to catch up.
Hey, listen, I got dumped by my manager, I guess 2-3 years ago. And I got dumped because of my age. The woman who was actively representing me was aghast. She couldn't believe it because she's my age. But the man who owned the management company at the time said if she hasn't made it by the time she's 60, she's not going to. And so this movie is this, that guy.
I think this movie's a lot of things, and I am excited just for all the ways that it's going to resonate when, you know, there's a bigger audience to have resonance chambers in, I guess.
And there's no simplistic approach. Erik does not, these guys do not talk down to the audience. No. They know their audience can follow the thread of the story. The reviews that I've read so far, I've been so excited. They get us. They understand. They know what we're saying. Well, yeah.
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 I think, to be fair, because generally every person can identify, even the younger audience would identify with Sienna, where she's coming into an established family. She's got her credentials. There's a ruthlessness about her in the, I'm very conscious that we might be timed out and we might have to kind of catch up after as well. So if we get cut off, I'll restart it. What I find interesting about Sienna's character as well is that a lot of the younger generation come through, and I see this in law as well, which is my day job, is that it's almost, you know, we've been raised in a corporate environment, and this applies to many, where women have been coming through the ranks, subject to harassment and almost complying with that. And then you have the younger generation who say that, you know, they're not going to tolerate it. But in Sienna's case, I picked up as in, I'm going to use this. And I see that in a lot of Gen Z, you know, I'm going to make him pay. I'm going to do this, you know, and there's that conflict of, well, what's really going on here under the patriarchy? Are you both still victims here?
And is the question there, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Heather. That was also shot clock. So I just would love to, like, I wish Nicole was here, because in our early conversations, we talked about this, is like, is it an empowering tactic, or is it feeding into an established system of abuse? I mean, which is it? And, you know, at that moment I was like, let's explore it. That's that's the movie. Let's see these different tactics that are playing, and how that plan pans out, and how that's going to create interpersonal conflict. Because I think we said it earlier, there's no like one villain in this movie. I think it's like a system that's a villain, or I think it's just life itself is a villain, or the way just habits are the villain, and how that brings out the worst and best of everybody. And then when one rainy night at a radio station, when that all comes to a head. You know?
And of course, there's, you know, we see those flashbacks of Amy being harassed, but then she's grown to love Robert and obviously stayed there for a while.
I have to disagree. In those flashback scenes, which was one of the most incredible acting challenges I think I've ever had, is to play a younger woman without visibly looking like one. And the dynamic with Sienna and Bob is clearly transactional, and many things in life are transactional. Marriage, jobs, you know, community relations, whatever. People are transactional. What can you give me? What can I give you? The difference I felt for Amy was in love with Bob at the beginning. Bob started her out, and she gave herself to him, not only for her professional well-being. She believed when he said how special she is, and I think she was in love with him. I believe she had a genuine feeling. I don't believe she was harassed, but as the relationship progressed through time, it became transactional.
What I was going to say is, I mean, that scene is purposefully ambiguous because I'm not looking, I don't want to downplay any kind of manipulation that might have been happening, but I think it was important to show that in that moment, you had to understand that there was something in Amy's headspace that kept her there, and seeds that were planted. And in a larger sense, it was interesting to me for some of the reasons that we were talking about earlier, to create a romance scene with an older woman and a younger guy with no trace of irony. That was really important to me. And I think that that's one of my favorite moments in the movie, just because it is, I just love the way they play it. I think Greg came in and knocked it out of the park, and Caroline.
Oh, he was so great. He was so great.
And Caroline did some stuff that you just don't normally. Yeah, anyway, so I think that scene is interesting because it just, you see how the seeds are getting planted for what inevitably curdles into the really gross, fucked up dynamic that you get in the office scenes with them nowadays, and making carries on, and what made him become so ugly. But I wanted to make sure that you sort of got it, that she did have feelings, or she thought she had feelings, and she was confused, and that he may have had some earnestness at the beginning, but also really bad ways of going about it, and then he became enveloped in those himself. Again, there's no villain in this movie beyond you know, and so I think that, you know, he's a very bad guy when we meet him in the movie, but you know what I'm saying? The idea that you see that there is ambiguity there, and his methods, maybe there were some good intentions, maybe not, maybe his methods were bad, maybe he knew it, maybe he didn't, but the fact that somebody can become overwhelmed with a place and time and identity, and then become the worst of those things, was just really, really interesting. And so to be able to have those levels was just really awesome, and that Caroline and Greg played that scene like that was really cool.
Yeah, it's incredible, and to see everything play out. But again, it's that life change. So maybe, was maybe romance at the beginning. There's still that loyalty there and all those memories, but things have changed, and she hasn't accepted that, or rather, maybe she has at some level, but this a jealousy towards which plays out as, I'm going to try and look after you, and obviously that comes back to haunt her in some respects. But yeah, it's a very there's so many layers. We probably could talk all day about it, definitely. And I think it definitely I'm pleased that this is just not a film that you sit down and watch once. I will probably watch again and again and again, especially because of the Jacob's Ladder, where I'm just like, what is going on? Which I know is deliberate, and part of the horror element, in that you're not quite sure what's going on, which you said right at the beginning, that twilight zone, that feeling of disorientation. But when we're in a human situation, it can feel like that as well. So I did explore that. Now I'm conscious of time. So what I will say from a, I said at the beginning, what is your advice to, especially as this is your debut as well, Eric, I understand. Is that right? Second. Not quite. Well, even so, a hell of a film to be making early in your career. There's having seen a hell of a lot of films as a blogger, absolutely it is a real gem. But what advice would you have to people, whether and by all means women in horror as well, or indeed anyone who is wanting to take that break and wanting to make their first film?
I think Adam and I
Don't give up.
Yeah, exactly. I think Adam and I would have the same advice, so I'll just say the first part, and Adam can elaborate. Use what you got, and as inspiration for what you can make that's uniquely you with the resources you have and the people that you have. I don't know if Adam, you want to elaborate on that, but we talk about that all the time. We talked about that since our first movie.
Yeah, Eric and I have a mentality of make what you can, when you can, as good as you can. And the opportunity is not always going to be there to be able to pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. And the most valuable thing that you have is your crew. That everyone has such incredible expertise. It's impossible to know everything that it takes to run a set the way that, I will never have the amount of knowledge that Peter Stuslav, our gaffer, has. Just he has and Thompson Wynn, our cinematographer, the way they're able to work together and make things happen, their value cannot be overstated.
I will share two pieces of advice that our friend Nick Tucci gave us for our first movie. And it sounds really stupid, not stupid, but like overly simplistic. But his voice will always be in my head is, just make the movie. Just make the movie. And it's not more complicated than that, but in some ways it's not. And then the other one, more recently, is don't let perfect be the enemy of great, which feeds into what we're talking about too. If we can make something and we can be proud of it, and we can, I'm not saying create haphazardly, but I'm saying if you can make something and it means something to you and it's uniquely you and you have the resources to do it, then don't let perfect be the enemy of great. That
does mean a lot, because certainly, there's some films where, okay, you could look at them and that you might pick up on certain things, but ultimately it's the audience experience. And I think if you've got something great and such powerful dynamic and story such as you have, then, maybe things that an audience wouldn't notice, like angle or color or something where you would look at it and go, I didn't do that right. It may not be picked up on because you're drawn in with the story. So I do appreciate, but you can get hung up on perfect, definitely. But certainly all of you, especially Caroline, talking about women in horror as well. I mean, you mentioned about Barbara, who I met a few years ago at Grimfest, who was very much, I don't want to be referred to as a screen queen because that is loaded. I want to be taught as a genre actor. And I've been using that language in all of my interviews thanks to meeting Barbara. But certainly your own perspective and advice to women who are coming into horror, and this counts for all of you, whether it be in front of the camera or behind. What would you like to say to me to encourage me as a woman in horror?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter what your conditions of life are. You just go do it. I mean, if anybody had said, at 63, you will begin to reclaim your career. I asked a friend of mine who's a psychologist, I said, maybe I am too old. Maybe I shouldn't do this. She said, how old are you going to be if you don't do it?
Yeah, you're just going to get older. So might as well start now.
Yeah. And nothing. And I didn't try. And, but for me, this is what I live for. Now, previously I lived for my family and my kids. I still live for my kids. They're still an enormously important part of my life, but I get to do this again. It's really extraordinary. I got to play this part, which is an amazing part. It's just, it's.
Well, it was for you. It just seems, I know at all the circumstances, it just seemed like it can't be anyone else. But that is you
I
making
appreciate
that
that
part.
so much.
That is you making it your own, though. I appreciate that.
I think that bridges
Thank
into
you.
a good cap for this is I found the email that Barbara sent when we got Caroline. So I'll just
Oh my God, I can't believe you found it.
When I told her we got Caroline, she said, Caroline is a terrific and powerful actress. She'll do an incredible job. And she's a nice and funny person. I'm so happy it worked out with her. And now here we are.
Yeah.
Isn't that something? Now that's women helping women, you know? There might be a lot of mean girl out there, and there's a lot of mean guy, human beings being who they are. But it's been such value to have this tiny little group of women out here in LA who genuinely want to help each other, support each other, write things for each other, hire each other, find somebody who's going to hire. I mean, that's how it went down. That's how it went down.
Yeah. Fantastic. Absolutely. But yeah, certainly we should all, especially in the genre community, whether whoever, we should be looking after each other, because we tend to work on each other's films, whether it's behind the camera or in front of it. So it's good to find those like-minded people. But genuinely, and I'm conscious, well, I will need to let you prepare for your next meeting. It's been absolutely incredible and an absolute honor meeting all of you. The film, I can't wait to actually release the review, because it's an incredible film. You should all be very, very, well, I'm sure you're very, very proud.
Thank you.